My name is Diana. Listen to my story and learn. Thank you.
The day Diana found out, she did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not throw a single thing. She sat down at the kitchen table in her home in Plano, Texas. She had a glass of water that she never touched. She had a folder full of documents that she had spent 3 weeks quietly pulling together. And she did something far more terrifying than screaming. She went completely, absolutely still. Diana Carter had spent the last 15 years of her life building something real, something she believed in with every part of herself. A marriage, a home, a future, a portfolio of investments that she and her husband Marcus had worked side by side to grow from nothing. And in that folder on the kitchen table was the proof that every single piece of it had been moved out of her name. Every property, every account, every carefully structured investment, quietly, deliberately, legally, and all of it was now sitting in the names of her in-laws, Robert and Carol Monroe. The question is not just how Marcus did it. The question is how long he had been planning it, and what Diana Carter did next. That is the part that legal professionals, forensic accountants, and family law attorneys are still talking about today. Because what this woman did when she found out she had been financially stripped from the inside out of her own marriage is the kind of move that nobody teaches you in school. Nobody warns you about it in premarital counseling, and nobody sees it coming until it is too late to stop. Except in this case, it was Marcus who ran out of time. Stay with me. This story is going to take you somewhere you did not expect to go. Before we go any further, you need to understand the scope of what we're talking about here. This is not a story about a bad marriage. Plenty of marriages go bad. This is not a story about infidelity or addiction or any of the usual things that pull two people apart. This is a story about calculation, about patience, about a man who looked at the woman he married and made a decision, a very long, very methodical decision, that she would not be walking away from this marriage with anything that mattered. And he nearly pulled it off. He was this close. By the time Diana opened that folder on the kitchen table, Marcus and his parents had spent 4 years restructuring nearly $800,000 in shared marital assets. For years. Think about that. While Diana was going to work every morning, managing projects, coming home, and cooking dinner, and planning vacations, and believing she was building a life with her husband, Marcus was running a parallel operation that she knew absolutely nothing about. The rental properties they had bought together, the brokerage accounts they had opened together, the retirement contributions they had made together. All of it, piece by piece, transferred, restructured, signed over. In the state of Texas, where the law considers most assets acquired during a marriage to belong equally to both spouses, Marcus Monroe had found a way to make it all disappear. Or so he thought. Here are the 3 questions we are going to answer in this video. First, how does a husband systematically move close to $1 million in marital assets without his wife's knowledge for 4 straight years? Second, what exactly did Diana find, and how did she find it? And third, and this is the one that still has people talking, what was the move that Diana made that turned the entire thing around? I want you to stay with me all the way to the end, because the answer to that third question is something that every single person watching this video needs to hear. Let's start at the beginning. Diana Carter grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. She was the oldest of 3 kids raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility to keep the lights on. From the time Diana was old enough to understand what a bill was, she understood that money was not something you took for granted. It was something you protected, something you planned for, something you respected. That mindset followed her straight through high school, through her accounting degree at Texas A&M University, and into a career as a project manager with a mid-sized construction firm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. By the time she was 30 years old, Diana Carter had 0 debt, a small savings account she was genuinely proud of, and a reputation at work for being the kind of person you called when something needed to get done and get done right. She was not the kind of woman who needed someone to take care of her. She had been taking care of herself for a very long time. But Diana also believed deeply in partnership, in building something together with someone who matched your energy and your ambition. She had watched her mother carry everything alone her entire life, and she had quietly made a promise to herself that when she found the right person, she would build something different, something shared, something real. She was 32 years old when she met Marcus Monroe at a company networking event in downtown Dallas. He was presenting on behalf of a real estate development company he worked for, and he was good at it. He was confident and funny and warm in the way that makes a room lean forward. Diana leaned forward too. Marcus Monroe grew up in Frisco, Texas, which by the early 2000s had become one of the fastest growing suburban communities in the entire country. His parents, Robert and Carol Monroe, had done well for themselves. Robert had owned a chain of auto repair shops that he built from a single garage, and Carol had managed the books for all of them. Together, they had accumulated a respectable amount of wealth, and they had very particular ideas about what that wealth meant and who it belonged to. The Monroe family was tight. Not tight in the warm, open-armed way. Tight in the way where loyalty meant keeping things close and inside, where outside influences, even a daughter-in-law, were always viewed with a certain careful distance. Marcus had grown up inside that system. He had absorbed it completely, even if Diana never fully saw it for what it was. Marcus and Diana dated for 2 years before he proposed. Their wedding was in September of 2006, held at a small chapel outside of Grapevine, Texas, with 200 guests. Robert and Carol Monroe sat in the front row. Diana wore her mother's pearl earrings. She had never been happier in her life. In the early years of the marriage, there was very little to suggest anything was wrong. They bought their first home together in Plano. They both kept working hard. Diana got promoted. Marcus moved into a higher-earning sales director role. They started talking about the future in the specific, exciting way that people do when they believe the best of it is still ahead of them. They opened a joint brokerage account. They purchased their first rental property, a small house in Garland, in 2011. Then a duplex in Richardson in 2013. Things were moving. Things were building. The only friction, if Diana were being completely honest about it later, was always in some way connected to Robert and Carol. There were Sunday dinners where financial decisions came up that Diana felt she was being informed of rather than consulted about. There were moments where Marcus would mention something his father had suggested and present it as settled before Diana had weighed in. There was a particular conversation in 2012. Diana remembered it clearly years later. Robert Monroe had said, while carving a turkey at Thanksgiving dinner, that a smart family always keeps its assets where they can be protected. She had not thought much of it at the time. She had taken another role and changed the subject. But that sentence would come back to her. For years later, sitting at her kitchen table with that folder in front of her, it would come back with a clarity that made her stomach turn. It was a Thursday evening in February of 2018. Diana was sitting at the desk in their home office doing what she did every year around this time, pulling together the documents they would need for their joint tax return. She was methodical about it. She had a folder system, a checklist, a routine she had followed for years. She pulled up the file for the Garland rental property and started cross-referencing the income statements against the prior year's return. And then she stopped, because the name on the property income documentation was not what she expected it to be. It did not say Diana and Marcus Monroe. It said Robert Monroe. She blinked. She looked again. She pulled up the digital county property records on her laptop and searched the address of the Garland house. Robert Monroe, listed as the sole owner. Transfer date, March 14th, 2014. Diana sat very still for a long moment. Then she pulled up the Richardson duplex. She searched the address. Carol Monroe, listed as the sole owner. Transfer date, September 2nd, 2015. Diana set down her pen on the desk very carefully. She did not panic. She did not call Marcus into the room. She closed the laptop and she went to bed. She lay there in the dark next to her husband, and she breathed evenly, and she waited for morning. Because Diana Carter was a project manager, and a project manager does not react to incomplete information. A project manager gathers the complete picture first. Then she acts. Over the next 3 weeks, Diana did something that took extraordinary composure. She continued her normal life without changing a single visible thing. She went to work. She came home. She cooked dinner. She laughed at her husband's jokes. She sat across from Robert and Carol Monroe at a Sunday dinner and smiled and passed the green beans and gave no indication whatsoever that she was pulling threads on an entirely different level. And every spare moment she had, lunch breaks, early mornings before Marcus was up, late evenings when he was watching television, she was quietly pulling financial records, property records, county deed transfers, account statements, tax filings. She built a document trail going back 4 years. And what she found over those 3 weeks was worse than what she had initially feared. The Garland house, gone into Robert Monroe's name in March of 2014. The Richardson duplex, gone into Carol Monroe's name in September of 2015. A third property they had purchased together in McKinney, transferred into an LLC that Marcus had established in his parents' names in January of 2016. Their joint brokerage account. The beneficiary designation had been quietly changed in late 2015 to list Robert Monroe as the primary beneficiary. Marcus had removed Diana from that designation without telling her. Without her signature, a retirement account Marcus held through his employer. Diana had been removed as the co-signer on the account management portal 18 months prior. She had never even noticed. She had no reason to check. By the time Diana had finished her 3 weeks of quiet research, she had documented the systematic transfer of assets, totaling approximately $780,000. Nearly $800,000. 15 years of two people's working lives. And on paper, Diana Carter had almost none of it. What she had was the house in Plano, which remained jointly titled, possibly because removing her from a mortgage would have triggered a lender review and drawn attention. And her own personal retirement account from her job. Everything else they had built and discussed and planned over 15 years of marriage had been moved into a structure specifically designed to exclude her. Diana closed her folder on a Tuesday evening, went into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, sat down at the table, and then she made a phone call, not to Marcus, to a family law attorney. She had chosen the attorney carefully. She had not asked Marcus. She had not asked any of their mutual friends. She had done her own research, read case reviews, and selected a woman named Patricia Wells, a family law attorney in Dallas with 22 years of experience and a particular specialty in high-asset divorce cases involving financial misconduct. Diana called Patricia's office the next morning at 8:15 and had an appointment for that Friday. When she sat down across from Patricia Wells for the first time, she put the folder on the desk. She folded her hands in her lap, and she said 6 words. She said, "I need you to see this." Patricia Wells opened the folder. She read for 11 minutes without speaking, and then she looked up at Diana and said, "Your husband has been building a very careful system. But careful does not mean unbeatable, not by a long stretch. Here is something that most people do not understand about financial betrayal inside a marriage. The betrayal itself, the moment of finding out, is only the first shock. What comes directly after it is almost more disorienting, because what comes after it is the discovery that the life you thought you were living and the legal reality of your life are two entirely different things. Diana Carter had believed she was an equal partner in a shared financial future. The legal documents told a different story, and the gap between those two realities, between what she had believed to be true and what was actually on paper, was the battlefield she was about to walk into. Patricia Wells spent the first meeting with Diana not on strategy, but on education. She explained the legal framework they were operating in. Texas, she told Diana, is a community property state. Under Texas law, property acquired by either spouse during a marriage is generally considered community property, meaning it belongs equally to both spouses, regardless of whose name is on the title. This is the foundational rule. Diana listened to all of this without interrupting. Then she asked one question. What do I need to prove? Patricia Wells said, intent. We need to prove that Marcus transferred these assets, not as a legitimate tax or estate strategy, but with the specific intent of depriving you of your legal share. She paused. Then she added, which is exactly why we're going to hire a forensic accountant before we file a single piece of paper. Diana nodded. She already knew what a forensic accountant was. She had been in finance-adjacent work her entire career, but she had never imagined she would need one to investigate her own marriage. The forensic accountant Patricia Wells brought in was a man named Raymond Cho, a certified fraud examiner and certified public accountant based in Dallas who had spent 17 years doing exactly this kind of work, finding money that had been moved, hidden, restructured, or otherwise made to disappear inside the financial architecture of a marriage or a business. Raymond Cho had worked on hundreds of divorce cases involving hidden assets. He had seen LLCs used as shells. He had seen property deeds quietly transferred to parents and siblings. He had seen brokerage accounts restructured so that a spouse technically retained access but held no legal ownership. He had seen it all. But even Raymond Cho, when he reviewed Diana's file for the first time, paused and said, "This one is thorough." Raymond's team began their financial reconstruction of the Monroe marriage going back to 2013, the year before the first known transfer. They pulled every record they could legally access: bank statements, tax returns, mortgage documents, county deed records, LLC registration filings, brokerage account records, business records from Marcus's employer, credit reports, public records. They built what Raymond Cho later described in his report as a financial timeline, a year-by-year, almost month-by-month map of how the marital estate had been quietly and systematically reorganized. And what that timeline revealed was a pattern that was striking in its deliberateness. The transfers had not happened randomly. They had happened in a sequence. The Garland property went first, the smallest of the rental properties, the least likely to trigger immediate alarm. Then the Richardson duplex a year and a half later. Then the McKinney property into the LLC structure. Then the brokerage beneficiary change. Then the retirement account adjustment. Each step was spaced out. Each was structured through a slightly different legal mechanism, so that no single document would tell the whole story. You would have to look at all of them together, across multiple years, across multiple asset categories, to see what was actually happening. Marcus Monroe had constructed something that was designed to look at any individual point of examination, like ordinary financial housekeeping. And he had been right for 4 years, because Diana had not been looking at all of them together, until she did. But here is what Raymond Cho and Patricia Wells found that Diana had not found in her own 3 weeks of research. They found the timing. Specifically, they found that the first asset transfer, the Garland property going into Robert Monroe's name in March of 2014, had occurred exactly 9 weeks after Robert and Carol Monroe had retained an estate planning attorney to restructure their own holdings. And it had occurred 3 months after Marcus Monroe had quietly consulted a divorce attorney in Dallas. Raymond Cho found this because Marcus had paid that consultation fee on a credit card tied to a business account that Diana had not known existed. A small account, opened before the marriage, technically separate property, used so infrequently it had never appeared on any joint statement. One payment, 3 months before the first transfer. The forensic accountant found it buried in a credit report that had not been requested in years. Patricia Wells looked at that payment record for a long time. Then she said he had already decided. The marriage ending was not the cause of the asset transfers. It was the other way around. He spent 4 years moving the money first, and then he was going to file. And by the time Diana got wind of any of it, there would have been nothing left for her to claim. The whole case had just shifted completely. This was no longer a matter of Marcus making questionable financial decisions during a marriage that fell apart. This was a case of a man who had consulted a divorce attorney in late 2013, then immediately begun transferring marital assets to his parents over a period of 4 years, in what appeared to be a coordinated strategy to exit the marriage with a financial upside entirely intact. Robert and Carol Monroe had accepted those transfers, and based on the estate planning timeline, at least one of them had been actively involved in structuring where the assets went and how. Diana Carter received Raymond Cho's preliminary report on a Wednesday afternoon. She read every page of it alone in her car in the parking lot of her office building. When she finished, she sat there for a while and looked out through the windshield at nothing in particular. She had known. She had known from the first night she found the Garland property listing. But knowing something and reading it in a 46-page financial reconstruction with dates and dollar amounts and credit card receipts and deed transfer records, that was a different weight entirely. She called her mother that evening and said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." Her mother listened. When Diana finished, there was a pause on the line. And then her mother said, in the quiet, measured voice of a woman who had seen hard things and kept going anyway, "What are you going to do?" And Diana said, "I already know exactly what I'm going to do. I have known since February." On a Tuesday morning in April of 2018, exactly 8 weeks after Diana had first sat down with Patricia Wells, Diana Carter filed for divorce in Collin County, Texas. But the filing itself was only half of what happened that morning. Attached to the divorce petition was a separate civil complaint, a civil fraud lawsuit naming 3 defendants: Marcus Monroe, Robert Monroe, and Carol Monroe. The civil complaint cited violations of the Texas Uniform Fraudulent Transfer Act. It alleged that all 3 defendants had participated knowingly and with intent in the systematic transfer of community property assets with the specific purpose of depriving Diana of her legal share of the marital estate. The complaint attached 37 exhibits: property records, date transfers, LLC filings, bank statements, credit card records, and Raymond Cho's 46-page forensic financial report as a supporting expert document. Marcus Monroe's personal attorney received the filing by courier that same afternoon. His reaction was not one of calm legal strategy. It was the reaction of a man who had spent 4 years believing he had built something airtight and had just discovered that it had never been airtight at all. Because the filing did not just target him, it targeted his parents. Robert Monroe, who was 71 years old and had spent his entire adult life keeping his financial affairs private and protected, was now a named defendant in a civil fraud lawsuit. Carol Monroe, who managed the family's books with the same precision she had applied to the auto shop accounts for decades, was a named defendant too. The Monroe family's carefully constructed wall had a very large hole in it, and it was called discovery. The discovery process in a civil lawsuit is one of the most powerful legal tools available to an injured party, and it is genuinely feared by people who have something to hide. Through discovery, Patricia Wells and her team would be entitled to subpoena every financial record, every bank statement, every business communication, every email, and every document held by all 3 defendants going back to the earliest known transfer date. Robert and Carol Monroe would be required to open their personal financial records, records they had kept private their entire lives, to scrutiny by opposing counsel and a forensic accountant. Marcus would be required to produce not just the records he had shared with Diana during the marriage, but the records he had never shared: the business credit card, the separate account, every communication with his parents' estate attorney, every communication with the divorce attorney he had quietly visited in 2013. Discovery is not a request. It is a compulsion. You comply, or you face contempt of court. Marcus's attorney reached out to Patricia Wells 2 weeks after the filing. The message was calibrated and professional. It suggested that the parties might benefit from early settlement discussions before the discovery process formally began. Patricia Wells's response was 2 sentences long. She said she was prepared to begin discovery as scheduled and looked forward to the process. There was no ambiguity in those 2 sentences. What they communicated was that Diana Carter was not here to negotiate from weakness. She was here to open every drawer. Discovery began formally in June of 2018, and what came out of that discovery process over the following 10 weeks was extraordinary, even by the standards of a forensic accountant who had seen a great deal. The most significant find was not a bank record or a deed. It was an email chain, a series of emails between Marcus Monroe and Carol Monroe going back to January of 2014, 3 months after Marcus's quiet divorce attorney consultation, discussing, in specific and practical terms, how to structure the transfer of the Garland property into Robert's name in a way that would survive legal scrutiny. The emails were not aggressive or secretive in their tone. They were businesslike. They used the language of estate planning and tax strategy. But the substance of them, when read in the context of Marcus having already spoken to a divorce attorney, told a story that was very different from estate planning. They told the story of a family coordinating to protect an exit. One particular email stood out among all the rest. It was from Marcus to his mother, dated February 3rd, 2014. In it, Marcus wrote that he wanted to make sure that by the time things became official, there would be nothing to argue about. Carol Monroe replied the same day. She wrote, "That is the smart way to handle it. Your father agrees. Just make sure nothing looks rushed. Take your time. Spread it out." Patricia Wells read that email in her office and called Raymond Cho immediately. Raymond Cho read it and said, "That is your intent." Right there in writing. That email, that single email, changed the entire legal landscape of the case. Because what Marcus and Carol Monroe had written to each other, in plain language, was that they knew the marriage was ending. They knew Diana would be entitled to a share of the assets, and they were coordinating to ensure that share would be as small as possible before the ending became official. That is not estate planning. That is fraud. The risk of a jury awarding Diana not just her equitable share, but additional damages beyond it was real and significant. The Monroe family had spent 4 years carefully protecting their financial position. They were about to spend a significant portion of that same financial position making this case go away. The settlement was finalized in November of 2018, 8 months after Diana had filed. The terms were sealed by the court at the request of both parties, which is standard in cases involving significant financial disclosure. What is publicly known as this: Diana was awarded full equitable distribution of all transferred assets, regardless of whose name those assets currently sat in. Robert Monroe was required to transfer the Garland property back. Carol Monroe was required to transfer the Richardson duplex back. The McKinney LLC was dissolved, and the property within it was treated as a marital asset subject to division. Diana received more than 50% of the total marital estate as compensation for the 4 years of fraudulent transfers. The court's recognition was clear. Marcus had not simply failed to disclose assets. He had actively worked to deprive Diana of them. And Marcus Monroe was ordered to pay Diana's legal fees in their entirety. Robert and Carol Monroe, who had spent their whole lives keeping their financial affairs airtight, were required to cooperate with the transfer of assets they had held in their names for years, and to provide full financial disclosure as part of the civil fraud resolution. The family dynamic, by all accounts, did not survive the experience. The Sunday dinners, the front row seat at the wedding, the decades of careful management. None of it had been enough to protect the Monroes from the one thing they had failed to account for: the fact that Diana Carter was paying attention. Marcus Monroe relocated from the Dallas-Fort Worth area within a year of the settlement's finalization. He started over in a different city, in a different role, at a different company. The wealth he had spent 4 years positioning himself to walk away with was substantially consumed by the settlement terms and the legal costs of fighting a case he could not win. The irony of that outcome is not lost on anyone who followed the case. In trying to protect every dollar, Marcus Monroe ended up spending a significant portion of those same dollars making sure his wife got her fair share of them. And Diana Carter. In the 18 months following the settlement, Diana did 3 things. The first thing she did was take a week off work and drive alone to the Texas Gulf Coast. She sat on the beach for several days and did very little of anything. She needed that. She had earned it. The second thing she did was work with Raymond Cho, the forensic accountant who had rebuilt her financial history, to develop a personal investment strategy using her recovered assets. She purchased 2 properties in the Dallas area under an LLC established in her name alone. Every document signed correctly. Every beneficiary designation filled in properly. Every financial structure exactly as it should be from day one. She was not starting over. She was starting forward with more knowledge than she had ever had before. The third thing Diana did was start talking. Not publicly at first, and not for attention. She started talking to people in her personal circle. Friends, colleagues, women at her church, who were having versions of the same quiet anxiety she had suppressed for years. The conversations about a spouse who handled all the finances. The conversations about being handed a document and being told to sign without fully understanding what it was. The conversations about feeling vaguely uncomfortable about money in your own marriage and telling yourself that discomfort was irrational because you trusted your partner. Diana started telling those people very directly that feeling is worth following. Not because your partner is necessarily doing something wrong, but because your name needs to be on your life. Your financial life belongs to you, and you are entitled to understand it. What Diana Carter discovered when she began having those conversations is the same thing that financial professionals have been trying to say for years. That financial abuse inside marriage is far more common than most people want to acknowledge. According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, financial abuse is a recognized form of domestic abuse, and it appears in an estimated 99% of cases that involve any form of domestic abuse at all. But it also appears in cases like Diana's. Cases where there is no physical threat, no obvious controlling behavior in daily life, no dramatic crisis that announces itself loudly. Just a long, quiet system of redirection, restructuring, and removal. Just one person in a partnership deciding, very calmly and very carefully, that the other person does not need to know where everything actually is. The National Endowment for Financial Education has reported that nearly 1 in 3 American couples experience some form of financial infidelity, meaning one partner concealing financial information, assets, or decisions from the other. 1 in 3. That is not a rare story. That is the house next door. That is the couple at the restaurant table across from you who look perfectly fine because things that happen on paper, in account portals, in quiet legal transfers, do not look like anything from the outside. Diana Carter looked perfectly fine from the outside for 4 years while her financial life was being reconstructed around her. The difference between her story ending the way Marcus planned and ending the way it actually ended was one tax document on a Thursday evening in February. One moment of something not looking right. One woman who did not let herself be talked out of what she was seeing. Now here's the part of the story that most people do not hear, because it did not happen in a courtroom. It did not happen in a settlement negotiation. It did not make any legal record anywhere. It happened in a church fellowship hall in Plano, Texas, on a Sunday afternoon about a year after Diana's settlement was finalized. Diana had agreed to speak informally to a group of women about financial literacy in marriage. She was not a public speaker. She was not an advocate by training. She was a project manager who had been through something and wanted to say something true about it. She stood up in front of about 30 women with a cup of coffee and no notes. And she said, "I trusted my husband completely, and I was right to trust him in most areas of our life. But I gave him my financial life to manage, and I never checked on it. And that trust became a door that he walked through. And I am here to tell you, know your own numbers, know your own accounts, know your own deeds. Not because your husband is a bad man, but because your financial life belongs to you. And you should know what it looks like." 3 women came up to her afterward with questions. One of them had a story that sounded uncomfortably familiar. Within 2 months, Diana had connected her with a family law attorney. Within 8 months, that woman had filed her own case. Diana Carter never planned to be anyone's guide through this. She just told the truth about what happened to her. And the truth turned out to be something a lot of people in a lot of quiet rooms needed to hear. I want to say something before we close this story. And I want to say it plainly. This is not a story about hating men. It is not a story about distrusting marriage. There are people in this world, men and women both, who have found themselves in Diana's position. And there are people in this world, men and women both, who have played the role Marcus played. Financial control and financial manipulation are not gendered. They are a power structure, and that power structure survives because of silence. The silence of the person being controlled, who often does not fully know they are being controlled. And the silence of a culture that treats money conversations in marriage as private, personal, and uncomfortable. Diana Carter broke that silence. And I want to make sure this story does the same thing in whatever small way a video can. So here is what I'm asking you to do after you finish watching this. I'm asking you to think about one thing. When was the last time you personally reviewed the complete financial picture of your household? Not your partner's summary of it. Not a general sense of how things are going. The actual documents. The actual accounts. The actual deed records if you own property. The actual beneficiary designations on the accounts that matter most. Because the way Marcus Monroe was able to do what he did for 4 years was not because Diana was naive or careless or unintelligent. She was none of those things. He was able to do it because she trusted him with the management of something that belonged equally to her. And she never had a reason to look until she did. And by the time she looked, for years had passed. I'm going to ask you a question, and I genuinely want you to answer it in the comments below this video. The question is this. If you found out tomorrow that your financial life looked completely different on paper than you believed it did, what would your first move be? Not emotionally, practically. What is the first call you would make? What is the first record you would pull? What is your version of what Diana did that Thursday night when she sat down to do the taxes and found a name on a property record that was not hers? Think about it. Write it in the comments. Because I read every single one, and I believe that those conversations matter. I believe that the most powerful thing we can do with a story like Diana's is not just be moved by it, but be changed by it. Just a little. Just enough to go look at the thing you have been assuming was fine. Before you go, make sure you are subscribed. Make sure the bell is on. Because the day that video goes up, you're going to be the first person to see it. For now, if this story stayed with you, if Diana's composure at that kitchen table made you feel something, if the detail of Marcus paying a divorce attorney on a quiet credit card 3 months before the first property transfer made your jaw tighten the way mine did the first time I read it, share this video with one person who needs to hear it. Just one. You probably already know who that person is. And if you're someone who is sitting with a quiet discomfort right now, a feeling about your own financial life in your own home that you have been telling yourself is irrational, please do not tell yourself that anymore. Follow the discomfort. Get the documents. Know your own financial life. Because your name needs to be on your life. Diana Carter learned that the hard way. You do not have to. If you or someone you know is experiencing financial abuse within a relationship, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at 1-800-799-7233. Financial abuse is real. It is recognized. And there are people trained to help you understand your options. You do not have to figure it out alone. Diana Carter did not, and neither do